Some of you guys are ready for the preaching. Anyway, by the grace of God, today I can carry on, and I pray that will not limit what God wants to deliver to you in this message. Turn your Bible, if you would, to Genesis chapter 47. Genesis chapter 47, and in verse 13 to verse 28. Genesis chapter 47, verse 13 to verse 28. We're about 3 more chapters to the book of Genesis. So I'm predicting that we'll probably be finished somewhere in July, right before our missions conference. Then after that, you guys will see what books we're going to be in next. But we'll be in the New Testament the next term, all right? We'll be in the New Testament, looking forward to that. Genesis chapter 47, we're going to look at verse 13 to verse 28. As you turn on their way, just hear me out. Today's message is a continuous. The second part of the title is God's Providential Acts. God's Providential Acts. Last week we looked at the first God's Providential Acts upon His provision. God provides always for God's people. All right? God's provision is not limited only to what I need, what I want. God's provision is not limited only to what we have to have in order for us to survive. God's provision is beyond our personal demands. God's provision is always something to do with God revealing Himself. God always reveals Himself in everything that He does, in everything that He says. Everything about what God does is all about Him. So whenever God provides for your needs, every time God provides our needs, it's always that God has something in there in plan for us to reveal of who He is. Always that. Keep in mind, every time you have $1 in your pocket, every time you have anything that God given to you in your possession, that provision is always for God to reveal Himself. That's why we have to be careful on what we buy. There are certain things that we buy that not necessarily will glorify God. You know what I mean? There are certain things that we spend our money on that not necessarily glorifying God. There are certain things that sometimes we put on ourselves and that's not necessarily glorifying God. We have to be careful. As God's people, everything that God provides always to reveal Himself, to reveal who God is. Today, we're going to look at the second providential act of God, and the word I'm going to use here is prosperity. And everybody's like, ooh. Prosperity. I know that prosperity gospel is very popular today. You hear that many in TVs, many churches, usually runs where big numbers of people, they love to hear about prosperity. Prosperity is it's not so common word to use today, but it is a popular lifestyle that people are seeking for. People want to be prosper. They want to have something more, or just prosperity. Prosperity is defined as the state of being prosperous or the state of being successful, especially when they talk about prosperity, always thinking about material or in finance. All right? When we think about prosperity, we think about material things, physicals, and finance, right? There are 2 kinds of prosperities, if I can categorize prosperity, and there are 2 kinds of them. One we call that is the physical or material prosperity, and there is the spiritual prosperity. Now, let me just define it to you this way. When someone is physically or materially prosperous, it does not mean that that person is spiritually prosperous. Let me say it again. If someone is physically or materially prosperous, okay, or have plenteous, it does not necessarily mean that that person is spiritually prosperous. All right? But when someone is spiritually prosperous, that person is usually, and most of the time, is physically and materially prosperous. This morning I asked my girls as we were having, lunchtime when we were sitting down together, and I asked the girls, which one is more prosperous, A man who has $10 and a man who has $1,000, which one is more prosperous? And of course, you know, one of my girls is spiritual than the other. Said the $10 then, you know. But the other one is more, you know, straightforward. Say $1,000 one. And so I told them, I said, well, the answer to that is both. Just because you have $10, it does not mean that you're not prosperous. Just because you have $1,000 does not mean you're prosperous. Because the prosperity, material prosperity, is measured by comparison. Do you know what I mean? Like for example, all right, I have $100, for example, in my pocket, and then there's someone here, maybe Dowd has $100, and Dowd said like, oh, Pastor Erwin is more prosperous than me because he has $100 and I only have 10. And yet right here, Mike has $1,000, and Mike, I'm looking at Mike and Mike, he's more prosperous than me. And yet Louis over there, he has a $10,000, and he says like, no, I'm more prosperous than every one of you guys. You see that we measure prosperity, material and physical prosperity, by others, by those around us, by the popularity or by the society. If you were to live in Vanuatu, prosperity doesn't mean you have $1,000. If you have a house that is built on bricks and cement, you are prosperous. But if you are living in the shack, then you're not as prosperous. The level of prosperity, material prosperity, is just, there's no end to it. All right? Especially with medias. We have so much that we can be exposed to on the internet, and we look upon people that have, you know, so much more, and they're like, man, that's prosperity. And yet you are, where you are is prosperous enough. But you will never feel like it's prosperous enough because you compare with somebody else. Spiritual prosperity is that we are into comparison with God, with God's standard. Spiritual prosperity is always in comparison to God's standard. And so what's important? Which one is more important? The material and physical prosperity or spiritual prosperity? Which one is more important, you think? Again, if you have millions of dollars and you think you're prosperous, but then you are spiritually in wreck, you do not know God, then there is no satisfaction to it. Remember last week I mentioned this verse I have it on the screen here in James chapter 4, verse 1 and 3, when it says, where do wars and fight come among you? Do they not come from the desire for pleasures? The war that is in your members, you lust and you do not have, you murder and covet and you cannot obtain. You ask and do not receive because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasure. You see that the point of this is that the desire for pleasure, that war in your members, you lust and you do not have. It does not mean you do not have it, but you lust for it because you think that you don't have enough. You murder and covet and you cannot obtain. That's why there's so many crimes. The crime is not because there's a lacking in finance in the country. New Zealand is one of the richest countries in the world. Do you know that? If you look at the taxation level, New Zealand is one of the highest one in the world. And the system that the government has in here, I mean, it's more than many other countries. More than half of the countries are a lot poorer than we are. And yet we live in New Zealand. There are many people who are still living in so-called in poorness, or feel like they don't have enough because their prosperity to them is more, always more. There's never enough. On the other hand, spiritual prosperity can and will bring satisfaction and delight in whatever condition you are in. Look at this in this verse. I don't have it in there. Oh, I do. In 1 Timothy, in chapter 6, verse 10, it says that now godliness with contentment is great gain. Did you hear that? Godliness with contentment is a great gain. It's prosperity. It's not about how much you have or how many you have. It's about godliness and the contentment. It says, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we cannot carry nothing out. Remember that. Every time you think about, I want this, I want that, remember this. There's nothing Nothing that you can gain on this world to be brought, it can be carried on to when you die. Only one thing that you can carry on, that is the soul. Soul is created for eternity. It is certain that we cannot carry nothing on. And having food and clothing, listen to that. Having clothing and food and clothing, with this we shall be content. I don't see anybody here who's suffering from food. I don't see anybody here suffering from clothing. And with that, we shall be content. With that contentment, with godliness, with spiritual contentment, spiritual prosperity, that is great gain. And then it says this, but those who desire to be rich, it says those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Isn't that popular? You see a lot of people that are popular, people that is loaded with money, possessions, and sadly they ended their life with things that are just so disgraceful. You heard people that, movie stars that kill themselves in a really weird way, and some people even get into stupid accidents for no reason whatsoever. We've seen many people that have more who suffer the most. I mean, they don't show it out there because they spend a lot of money covering themselves with makeups and everything else they want to put on. But deep in the heart, when they're alone in their room, you know the battles that they are facing. But then it says this. Listen to this. For the love of money, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Notice it says the love of money, not money alone, the love of money. Is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith even. Christians, don't say that you will not be tempted by this, because it says that but some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. That means us, Christians, we're not exempt from falling into this materialism. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So then, prosperity itself, material, spiritual, it's not bad in itself. And actually, if you look at your Bible, there's so many people in the Bible that are quite prosperous. One that popped in my mind is Job. I mean, he was a very prosperous man. Wealthy as Kiwi says. Very loaded. And yet, when God allows Satan to take everything of his possessions, the Bible said that he never cursed God with his lips. Another one who was prosperous was Solomon. Remember when Solomon was in a young age when God appointed him? And then God asked him, Solomon, what do you have? What do you want? What did he ask from God? Wisdom. He said, I do not seek for wealth, I do not seek for power, but I seek for wisdom. Because he knew that without wisdom, without spiritual prosperity, that wealth and power means nothing. It's just going to bring them to trouble and perditions and many other evil things. So then we're going to observe this today in our passage chapter 47 and in verses 13 to verse 28 of that prosperity, godly prosperity. Look at with me, if you would, in that chapter 47. Let's begin from verse 11, just to refresh our mind. We begin from there, and then we move on to the verse 28 in chapter 47. You ready? All right, let's read it. Verse 11, and Joseph situated his father and his brothers, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread, according to the number in their families. Verse 13. Now there was no bread in all the land. Means like in the whole world. For the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Look at the key word in there, languished, because of famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, for the grain which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. I want you to underline in your Bible whenever there is the word that says into Pharaoh's house. Okay, from this passage we're reading. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." And Joseph said, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle of the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. Verse 18. When that year had ended, they came to him in the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh." Underline that, servants of Pharaoh. "Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate. Then Joseph brought all the land of Egypt to Pharaoh. Underline that. He brought all the land of Egypt to Pharaoh. For every man of Egyptians sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities from one end of the border of Egypt to the other end. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their lands. Verse 23.